The dust from the attorney's boots had barely settled on her porch when Diana Hamilton realized her entire world was about to crumble beneath her feet like the dry Kansas soil after a summer drought. She stood in the doorway of the modest ranch house her husband Thomas had built with his own two hands, watching the lawyer disappear down the road toward Newton in his black carriage, and felt the paper in her trembling fingers as though it weighed more than all the cattle on her land combined. The words swam before her eyes, but their meaning was clear enough. Thomas had been dead for 3 months, taken by fever in the spring of 1882, and now his family wanted what they believed was rightfully theirs. Mrs. Hamilton, the lawyer had said with barely concealed disdain, your late husband's brothers have filed a claim stating that, as you and Mr. Hamilton had no children, and as the land was originally purchased with family money, it should revert to the Hamilton family upon his death. They are prepared to take this matter before Judge Morrison next month. Diana had wanted to scream that Thomas had worked this land for 5 years before his death, that every fence post and every head of cattle represented his sweat and determination, that the small amount of money his father had loaned him had been repaid within the first 2 years. But the lawyer had simply tipped his hat and left, and now she stood alone with a legal document that threatened to strip away everything. She was 24 years old, had been married for 4 years, and had believed that the life she and Thomas built together was secure. The ranch was small by Kansas standards, just over 300 acres of prairie grassland with a creek running through the eastern border, but it was profitable enough. They had nearly 100 head of cattle, a small stable of horses, and she had been managing it herself since Thomas's death with the help of 2 ranch hands. Diana walked back inside the house, setting the paper on the kitchen table as though it might bite her. The afternoon sun streamed through the windows, illuminating the simple but comfortable furniture Thomas had made, the curtains she had sewn, the life they had created together. Outside, she could hear the cattle lowing in the distance and the sound of hammering from the barn where Martinez, one of the ranch hands, was repairing a stall door. She needed help, legal help, but lawyers cost money, and she had a feeling that anyone she could afford in Newton would be no match for whatever representation the Hamilton family could buy. Thomas's brothers, Robert and Charles, owned a successful freight business in Topeka. They had never approved of Thomas's decision to ranch, had barely acknowledged Diana's existence at the wedding, and had not even bothered to attend his funeral. The sound of hoofbeats drew her attention back to the present. Through the window, she saw a rider approaching, sitting tall in the saddle on a bay gelding. She did not recognize him, which was unusual in these parts where everyone knew everyone else's business. Diana quickly smoothed her dark hair, still pinned up from the morning, and checked that her simple blue work dress was presentable before stepping back out onto the porch. The rider dismounted with an easy grace that spoke of years in the saddle. He was tall, perhaps 30 years old, with dark hair that needed cutting and several days' worth of stubble on his strong jaw. His clothes were dusty from travel but well made, his boots worn but quality leather. When he looked up at her, his eyes were a striking gray blue, the color of storm clouds over the prairie. "Madam," he said, removing his hat to reveal more of that unruly dark hair. "I'm looking for Mrs. Hamilton. Would that be you?" "It would," Diana replied, keeping her voice steady, despite her uncertainty about this stranger. "What can I do for you, Mr. Vaughn?" he supplied. "Dawson Vaughn. I heard in town that you might be looking for ranch hands. I've got experience with cattle, horses, mending fences, pretty much anything that needs doing on a spread like this." Diana studied him carefully. He had an honest face, she thought, with strong features, and those remarkable eyes that met hers directly, without the hint of impropriety that sometimes made her uncomfortable around men since Thomas's death. But she was also wary. She knew nothing about this man, and the timing of his arrival, right after the lawyer's devastating news, seemed almost too convenient. "Where are you coming from, Mr. Vaughn?" she asked. "Colorado most recently," he said. "Worked on a ranch outside Denver for 3 years. Before that, Texas. I've been drifting, I suppose, looking for the right place to settle for a while." Why Newton? He smiled slightly, and it transformed his face from merely handsome to genuinely appealing. Heard the land was good, the town was growing but not too fast, and that there might be opportunities for a man willing to work hard. I'm not looking to drift forever, Mrs. Hamilton. I'm looking to put down roots, save some money, maybe have my own place someday. Diana felt a strange pull toward this stranger, something she could not quite name. Perhaps it was simply desperation, or perhaps it was the quiet confidence in his voice, the steadiness in his gaze. She needed help, that much was certain. With the legal battle looming, she needed all the support she could get to prove the ranch was viable under her management. I can offer $30 a month, meals, and a bed in the bunkhouse, she said. The work is hard, the days are long, and I expect honesty and dedication. That sounds more than fair, madam, Dawson said. When would you want me to start? Today, if you're willing. You can put your horse in the barn. Second stall on the left is empty. Martinez and Coleman are the other hands. They'll show you where everything is. Dawson nodded, putting his hat back on. I appreciate the opportunity, Mrs. Hamilton. You won't regret it. As she watched him lead his horse toward the barn, Diana found herself hoping he was right. She went back inside, her mind already turning over the problems she faced. The hearing was in 4 weeks. She needed to gather documentation showing that Thomas had repaid his father's loan, that the ranch was profitable, that she was capable of managing it. But even with all of that, she knew the law often favored families over widows, men over women. That evening, after a simple dinner of beef stew and cornbread that Diana served to the 3 ranch hands at the long table in the bunkhouse, she found herself explaining her situation. She had not meant to, but Martinez, who had worked for Thomas since the beginning, asked directly about the lawyer's visit. They want to take the ranch? Martinez asked, his weathered face creased with concern. Can they do that? They're going to try, Diana said quietly. Thomas's brothers claim that because we had no children and because there was some family money involved at the start, the land should go to them. Coleman, a young man of 22 who had been with them for a year, shook his head. That ain't right. Thomas built this place from nothing practically, and you've kept it running just as good since he passed. The law doesn't always care about what's right, Diana said. It cares about what's legal. Dawson, who had been listening quietly, spoke up for the first time. Did Thomas have a will? Diana nodded. Yes, but it was simple. Everything to me. The lawyer says it doesn't matter much because the brothers are claiming the property itself was never truly Thomas's to leave. They say it was family property. Was the deed in Thomas's name alone? Yes, but they're arguing that the purchase money came from the family, so it should have been family property. Dawson leaned back, his expression thoughtful. Did Thomas have any documentation showing he repaid that money? I think so. He kept records of everything. I'll need to go through his papers. That's a start, Dawson said. If you can prove the debt was repaid, their claim gets weaker. What about the improvements to the land? The house, the barn, the fences? If Thomas built all that with his own labor and money earned from the ranch, that adds value that has nothing to do with the original purchase. Diana looked at him with new interest. You know something about the law, Mr. Vaughn? A little, he admitted. My father was a judge in Missouri before he died. I grew up hearing about cases like this. I'm no lawyer, but I learned a thing or two. For the first time since the lawyer's visit, Diana felt a small spark of hope. Would you be willing to help me go through the papers? I'd be grateful for another perspective. Of course, Dawson said. Whatever you need. Over the next week, Diana and Dawson spent several evenings going through Thomas's carefully kept records. They worked at the kitchen table by lamplight. Dawson's dark head bent close to hers as they examined account books, receipts, and correspondence. Diana found herself acutely aware of his presence, the quiet competence with which he helped her organize the documents, the way he explained legal concepts without condescension. Here, he said one night, pointing to a letter dated 4 years earlier. This is from Thomas to his father, acknowledging receipt of $500, and promising repayment within 2 years. And here, he pulled out an account book. These entries show regular payments sent to his father, totaling $600 over 18 months. He paid back more than he borrowed, Diana said. With interest, looks like. Do you have any response from his father acknowledging the repayment? Diana shuffled through more papers and found what they needed. A brief letter from Thomas's father stating that the debt was satisfied in full. It was dated nearly 3 years ago. This is good, Dawson said. This proves Thomas fulfilled his obligation. The land was his free and clear. Diana felt tears prick at her eyes, a combination of relief and grief. Seeing Thomas's careful handwriting, remembering how seriously he took his responsibilities, made her miss him with a sharp ache that had not dulled much in 3 months. I'm sorry, Dawson said softly, noticing her distress. This must be difficult. He was a good man, Diana said, wiping at her eyes. He deserved better than to die young, and he certainly deserved better than to have his brothers try to steal what he built. They won't succeed, Dawson said with quiet conviction. We'll make sure of it. The certainty in his voice steadied her, and Diana looked up to find him watching her with an expression she could not quite read. There was concern there, certainly, but also something else, something that made her heart beat a little faster. Why are you helping me like this? She asked. You barely know me. This isn't part of what I hired you for. Dawson was quiet for a moment, his fingers tracing the edge of the account book. I suppose, he said slowly. I don't like seeing people taken advantage of, and I admire what you're doing, keeping this place running on your own. That takes courage. Or stubbornness, Diana said with a small smile. Sometimes those are the same thing, Dawson replied, returning the smile. As the weeks passed, Diana found her feelings for Dawson growing more complicated. He was an excellent ranch hand, tireless and skilled, and both Martinez and Coleman respected him. But it was more than that. He made her laugh with dry observations about the cattle or stories from his drifting days. He listened when she talked about Thomas without the awkwardness most people showed around widows. He made her feel capable and strong rather than helpless and alone. She tried to tell herself it was simply gratitude or the natural result of spending so much time together, but she knew it was more than that. When he smiled at her across the dinner table, she felt warmth spread through her chest. When his hand accidentally brushed hers as they worked, she felt a spark of electricity that had nothing to do with gratitude. And sometimes, late at night when she lay alone in the bed she had shared with Thomas, she found herself thinking about Dawson's storm cloud eyes and wondering what it would feel like to be held by him. The guilt that followed these thoughts was crushing. Thomas had been dead only 3 months. What kind of wife was she to be thinking about another man so soon? She had loved Thomas, had mourned him genuinely, and yet here she was, developing feelings for a man who had wandered into her life at her most vulnerable moment. 2 weeks before the hearing, everything became more complicated. Diana was in Newton buying supplies when she encountered Robert and Charles Hamilton on the main street. They were both older than Thomas had been, Robert nearly 40, and Charles a few years younger. They had their father's proud bearing and their mother's cold eyes. Diana, Robert said, not bothering with any greeting, I hope you found somewhere else to live. The judge is a reasonable man, and I'm sure he'll see that family property should remain with the family. The property was Thomas's, Diana said, keeping her voice steady despite the anger building inside her. He repaid every cent your father loaned him. I have the documentation to prove it. Charles laughed, a harsh sound. Documentation can be forged, and even if Thomas did pay back the loan, the fact remains that you have no children, no real claim to Hamilton land. Our brother's death was tragic, but it doesn't entitle you to continue profiting from property that should rightfully be ours. Thomas wanted me to have the ranch, Diana said. He left a will stating exactly that. A will written in haste by a sick man who wasn't thinking clearly, Robert countered. The judge will see through it. Diana felt her cheeks flush with anger. Your brother was perfectly sound of mind, and he would be ashamed of what you're trying to do. Watch your tone, Charles said, stepping closer in what was clearly meant to be an intimidating gesture. You're a woman alone, Diana. You should be grateful we're willing to let you walk away with the household goods and the money from selling the cattle. It's more than you're entitled to. I'm entitled to what my husband left me, Diana said, and I'm not going anywhere. She turned and walked away before either of them could respond, her hands shaking with rage and fear. Back at the wagon, where she had left it outside the general store, she loaded her supplies with jerky movements, trying to calm herself. She did not notice Dawson until he spoke from directly behind her. Those were the brothers? He asked. Diana spun around, startled. What are you doing in town? Martinez mentioned we were running low on some things at the bunkhouse. I rode in to pick them up. His eyes were concerned as he studied her face. Are you all right? You look upset. I ran into Robert and Charles, Diana admitted. They're very confident they're going to win. They're trying to rattle you, Dawson said. Don't let them. It's not just that, Diana said, lowering her voice and glancing around to make sure no one was close enough to overhear. I'm worried they might be right. The law isn't always fair to women, Dawson. What if the judge decides that despite all our documentation, despite Thomas's will, the property should go to male heirs? Dawson was quiet for a moment, his expression serious. Then he said something Diana had not expected. There might be another way, he said slowly. It's not ideal, and you might not want to even consider it, but it would solve the problem. What do you mean? He hesitated, then met her eyes directly. If you were married, your claim to the property would be much stronger. A married woman managing a ranch with her husband is much more acceptable to the law than a widow trying to hold on to her late husband's property. Diana stared at him, her heart suddenly pounding. Are you suggesting I marry someone? I'm suggesting, Dawson said carefully, that if you married me, we could secure your claim to this land. It would be a business arrangement, purely practical. We could have a marriage in name only if that's what you wanted. But legally, it would give you protection. Diana felt as though the ground had shifted beneath her feet. You would do that? Marry me just to help me keep the ranch? I'd be helping myself too, Dawson pointed out. You said yourself you need a partner to manage the place properly. As your husband, I'd have a stake in making the ranch succeed. And eventually, when enough time had passed and it felt right, we could make it a real marriage. Or not. That would be entirely up to you. This is crazy, Diana said, but even as she spoke, her mind was racing through the implications. He was right that it would strengthen her legal position enormously. A married woman's property belonged to her husband, which meant the brothers would have no claim at all. And Dawson had proven himself to be trustworthy, hardworking, and genuinely interested in helping her. We barely know each other. I know you're strong and capable, and you deserve to keep what your first husband built, Dawson said. I know you treat your workers fairly, and you work harder than any ranch owner I've ever met. I know you make the best cornbread in Kansas, and you're stubborn as a mule when you set your mind to something. He paused, and a slight smile crossed his face. I know that's enough for me to take a chance on this if you are. Diana looked at this man who had appeared in her life so recently and yet felt somehow essential already. The logical part of her mind was screaming that this was insane, that you did not marry someone you had known for less than a month, that it was too soon after Thomas's death. But the practical part of her mind, the part that had kept the ranch running through her grief, was calculating odds and seeing that this might be her best chance. If we did this, she said slowly, it would have to be a real partnership. I won't be pushed aside or ignored just because there's a man's name on the deed again. I've been managing this ranch for 3 months and doing a good job of it. I wouldn't want it any other way, Dawson said. I meant what I said, Diana. This would be a partnership, equal in every way that matters. And the other aspects of marriage? Diana asked, feeling her cheeks heat. You said it could be in name only. Only if that's what you want, Dawson said quietly. I won't lie and say I haven't thought about you as more than an employer. I think you're beautiful and fascinating and braver than you give yourself credit for. But I also know you're grieving your husband and dealing with a legal battle, and the last thing you need is pressure from me. So, yes, we could keep it strictly business for as long as you needed. Maybe forever if that's what you decided. Diana took a deep breath, trying to still her racing heart. This was madness, and yet looking into Dawson's steady gray-blue eyes, she felt a certainty settle over her that she could not quite explain. All right, she said. Yes, let's do it. Yes, Dawson repeated as though he had not quite expected her to agree. Yes, Diana said more firmly. You're right that it's the most practical solution, and I trust you, Dawson. I don't know why exactly, given that we've only known each other a few weeks, but I do. Something shifted in Dawson's expression, a warmth entering his eyes that made Diana's breath catch. Then we should do it quickly, he said. Before the hearing, the judge can't award property to the brothers if you're already remarried and your new husband has legal claim. How quickly? Today, if possible. Reverend Matthews will marry us if we ask. We'll need witnesses, but Martinez and Coleman would stand up for us, I'm sure. Diana nodded, her mind already adjusting to this new reality. All right, today then. They made the arrangements with surprising speed. Reverend Matthews was initially concerned about the rushed nature of the wedding, but when Diana explained the situation with the Hamilton brothers, he agreed it was the most sensible solution. Martinez and Coleman, fetched from the ranch, were shocked but supportive. Diana changed into her best dress, a simple green cotton that Thomas had always liked, and tried not to think too hard about what she was doing. The ceremony itself was brief and businesslike. Diana stood beside Dawson in the small church, aware of his height and solid presence beside her, and repeated vows she had spoken once before to a different man. When Dawson slid a plain gold band onto her finger, his hands were steady even though hers shook slightly. And when Reverend Matthews pronounced them husband and wife, Dawson leaned down and pressed a gentle, chaste kiss to her lips that nonetheless sent a shiver through her entire body. It's done, he said quietly, for her ears only. You're safe now. They filed the marriage certificate with the county clerk that same afternoon, ensuring there would be legal documentation of the union before the hearing. When they returned to the ranch as the sun was setting, Diana felt as though she was living in a dream. She was married again. To a man she barely knew, it was possibly the most impulsive thing she had ever done in her naturally cautious life. That night, after an awkward dinner where Martinez and Coleman tried too hard to act as though everything was normal, Diana and Dawson stood together on the porch. The prairie stretched out before them in the gathering darkness, vast and peaceful. I'll stay in the bunkhouse, Dawson said. I don't want to presume anything. You're my husband now, Diana said, the words feeling strange on her tongue. It would look odd if you stayed in the bunkhouse. People will talk. Let them talk. Your comfort is more important. Diana turned to look at him, this man who had upended her life and yet somehow made her feel more secure than she had in months. I appreciate that, Dawson, but you're right that appearances matter. You can take the spare room. It's small but comfortable. They worked out a routine over the next few days that felt surprisingly natural. Dawson moved his few belongings into the spare room, a small space off the kitchen that Thomas had used for storage. Diana found herself acutely aware of him in the house, hearing him move around in the early morning, sharing meals at the kitchen table instead of him eating with the other hands. They were scrupulously polite with each other, careful not to overstep the boundaries of their arrangement. But Diana could not deny that having him there felt right in a way she had not anticipated. The house had been so lonely after Thomas died, the silence oppressive. Now there was life in it again. The sound of Dawson's boots on the floorboards, his low voice as he talked to her about the day's work, even his presence in the next room at night somehow comforting. The hearing arrived with the speed of a summer storm. Diana dressed in her best dress again, pinned her hair up carefully, and rode into Newton beside Dawson in the wagon. She clutched the folder of documentation they had prepared, her stomach tight with anxiety despite their preparations. The courtroom was stuffy and crowded. Robert and Charles Hamilton sat with their lawyer, a slick-looking man in an expensive suit. They both did double takes when they saw Dawson beside Diana, their expressions shifting from surprise to suspicion. Judge Morrison was a gray-haired man in his 60s with a stern face and sharp eyes. He called the hearing to order and listened as the Hamilton brothers' lawyer presented their case. It was much as Diana had expected. They claimed the property had been purchased with family money, that Thomas had died without heirs, and that, as his brothers, they were the rightful inheritors of the Hamilton family property. Your Honor, Diana's hastily hired lawyer said when it was his turn, Mrs. Vaughn has documentation proving that her late husband, Thomas Hamilton, fully repaid the loan from his father used to purchase the property. The land was Mr. Hamilton's free and clear, and his will explicitly left everything to his wife. Mrs. Vaughn has remarried, and she and her current husband are successfully managing the ranch. There is no legal basis for the brothers' claim. Mrs. Vaughn? Robert Hamilton said loudly. She's remarried. 4 days ago, the lawyer confirmed. To Mr. Dawson Vaughn, who was seated beside her. The marriage is fully legal and documented. The Hamilton brothers' lawyer looked flustered, clearly not having expected this development. He huddled with Robert and Charles for a moment before addressing the judge again. Your Honor, this marriage seems suspiciously convenient, coming as it does mere days before this hearing. We question whether it is a legitimate union or simply a legal maneuver to avoid the rightful inheritance of the Hamilton brothers. Judge Morrison turned his sharp gaze on Diana and Dawson. Mr. and Mrs. Vaughn, would you approach the bench? They stood and walked forward together. Diana felt Dawson's hand at the small of her back, a gentle, steadying touch. Mrs. Vaughn, the judge said, is it true you married Mr. Vaughn only 4 days ago? Yes, Your Honor, Diana said, keeping her voice steady. And Mr. Vaughn, how long have you known Mrs. Vaughn? About a month, Your Honor, Dawson admitted. I came to work on her ranch as a hand. This does seem remarkably convenient, the judge observed. Some might say it appears to be a marriage of convenience, rather than a true union. Diana felt panic rising in her chest, but before she could speak, Dawson's voice rang out clear and strong. Your Honor, if I may speak plainly? At the judge's nod, he continued. Yes, the timing is convenient. Yes, we married quickly. But if you're asking whether this is a real marriage, the answer is absolutely yes. I married Diana because she's an extraordinary woman who deserves to keep what her first husband built and what she's maintained through her own hard work and determination. I married her because the alternative was watching her be cheated by men who never cared about their brother's dreams or his legacy. And I married her because in the short time I've known her, I've come to care for her more than I thought possible. He paused, and when he continued, his voice was softer, but no less firm. Maybe it started as a practical solution, Your Honor, but I can promise you it's become much more than that. At least for me. Diana stared at Dawson, her heart pounding. She had not expected him to say any of that, and the raw honesty in his voice made her breath catch in her throat. Judge Morrison studied them both for a long moment, then looked down at the documents before him. Finally, he spoke. I've reviewed the evidence presented by both parties. The documentation shows clearly that Thomas Hamilton repaid the loan from his father in full. The property was therefore Mr. Hamilton's to dispose of as he wished, and his will left everything to his wife. The fact that Mrs. Hamilton, now Mrs. Vaughn, has remarried does not change the validity of her late husband's will. I find no legal basis for the claim presented by Robert and Charles Hamilton. The property remains with Mrs. Diana Vaughn and her husband Dawson Vaughn. Case dismissed. The gavel came down with a sharp crack, and Diana felt her knees go weak with relief. Dawson's arm came around her waist, supporting her, and she leaned into him without thinking. It's over, he said quietly. You won. We won, Diana corrected, looking up at him. Behind them, she could hear Robert and Charles Hamilton arguing angrily with their lawyer, but she did not care. The ranch was hers. Theirs. secure, and legally protected. Everything Thomas had worked for would be preserved. They walked out of the courthouse into the bright Kansas sunshine, and Diana took a deep breath of the warm air, feeling as though a weight had been lifted from her chest. Martinez and Coleman, who had been waiting outside, whooped with joy when they heard the news. "Drinks on me at the saloon," Martinez declared. "We need to celebrate." "You go ahead," Dawson said. "We'll catch up with you later." As the two ranch hands headed off down the street, Diana turned to Dawson. They stood alone on the courthouse steps, the sounds of Newton going about its business all around them. "Thank you," she said, "for everything, for helping with the documents, for the marriage, for what you said in there to the judge." "I meant every word," Dawson said seriously. "Diana, I know this started as a business arrangement, but I need you to know that my feelings for you are real. I'm not asking you to feel the same way, especially so soon after losing Thomas. But I wanted to be honest with you." Diana looked at this man, who had come into her life so unexpectedly and changed everything. She thought about the past month, about how easy it had been to work beside him, to trust him, to enjoy his company. She thought about how her heart had leaped when he defended their marriage to the judge. And she thought about Thomas and what he would have wanted for her. Thomas had loved her. She knew that, without question. And because he had loved her, he would have wanted her to be happy. He would not have wanted her to spend the rest of her life alone, grieving. He had been too generous a man for that. "Dawson," she said slowly, "I won't pretend I'm not still grieving Thomas. I loved him, and I probably always will in some way. But that doesn't mean there isn't room in my heart for someone else." She reached out and took his hand, feeling the calluses from ranch work, the strength in his fingers. "You've been patient and kind and supportive, and somewhere along the way, I started to care for you too. I don't know if it's love yet, but I think it could be, given time." The smile that spread across Dawson's face was like sunrise breaking over the prairie, warm and full of promise. "Time is something we have plenty of," he said. "I'm not going anywhere, Diana. This is where I want to be. With you." He leaned down slowly, giving her plenty of time to pull away if she wanted, and kissed her. Unlike the chaste kiss at their wedding, this one was deeper, more meaningful. Diana felt herself responding, her arms coming up to circle his neck, and for the first time in months, she felt truly alive. When they finally broke apart, both slightly breathless, Dawson rested his forehead against hers. "We should probably go celebrate with Martinez and Coleman," he said. "But later when we get home, I think we need to talk about our sleeping arrangements." "Oh?" Diana said, feeling her cheeks heat. "I'm finding that spare room very lonely," Dawson admitted. "And if we're going to make this a real marriage, not just on paper but in every way, then I'd like to share your bed. Only if you're ready, though. I meant what I said about not pressuring you." Diana thought about the big bed that had felt so empty these past months, about how comforting it would be to fall asleep in someone's arms again, to wake up beside someone, to be held and wanted and loved. "I think I'd like that," she said softly. "I think I'm ready." The celebration at the saloon was raucous and joyful. Word had spread about the hearing, and many of the townspeople who had known and liked Thomas came to congratulate Diana on her victory. She noticed that people referred to Dawson as her husband without any of the surprise or judgment she had feared, and several people mentioned that Thomas would have been glad to know she was not alone. As the evening wore on, Diana found herself studying Dawson across the crowded saloon. He was talking with some of the local ranchers, his easy manner and obvious knowledge winning them over quickly. She realized that he fit into her life, into this community, as though he had always been meant to be there. When they finally rode back to the ranch in the wagon, the stars were brilliant overhead, and the prairie night was alive with the sound of crickets and distant coyotes. Dawson drove with one hand, his other arm around Diana's shoulders, and she leaned into his warmth. "Nervous?" he asked quietly as they approached the house. A little, Diana admitted. Is that silly? Not at all. This is a big step. They took care of the horses together, a comfortable routine they had fallen into over the past weeks. Martinez and Coleman had stayed in town, giving them privacy. As they walked from the barn to the house, Diana felt her heart beating faster. Inside, Dawson lit the lamps while Diana checked that everything was secured for the night. It was a delaying tactic, and they both knew it. Finally, she turned to find him watching her from across the kitchen, his eyes dark and intense. "Come here," he said softly. Diana crossed the room to him, and he pulled her into his arms, holding her close. She could feel his heart beating against her cheek, strong and steady. "We can take this as slow as you need," he murmured into her hair. "There's no rush." But Diana found that she did not want to go slow. She had been alone for too long, had been strong for too long, and she wanted the comfort and connection that Dawson was offering. She tilted her head back and kissed him, putting all her tangled feelings into it, her gratitude, her growing affection, her desire, her hope for the future. Dawson responded with carefully controlled passion, his hands gentle as they moved over her back, her waist, her face. He led her to the bedroom, the one she had shared with Thomas, and Diana felt a moment of uncertainty. But when Dawson cupped her face in his hands and looked into her eyes, his expression so tender and full of understanding, she knew it was all right. Thomas was gone, and it was time to start building a new life. They made love slowly, gently, learning each other's bodies with care and attention. Dawson was patient and attentive, making sure Diana felt safe and cherished. And when they finally lay tangled together in the darkness, Diana felt a peace settle over her that she had not experienced since before Thomas's death. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" Dawson asked, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "For being you. For coming into my life when I needed you most. For marrying me and fighting for me and making me feel alive again." "Diana," Dawson said seriously, propping himself up on one elbow to look down at her, "you're the strongest, most remarkable woman I've ever met. I'm the lucky one here. I was drifting, looking for something I couldn't name, and then I found you. I found home." Diana felt tears prick at her eyes, but they were good tears, tears of relief and joy and new beginnings. She pulled Dawson down for another kiss, and they spent the rest of the night discovering each other, building the foundation of their marriage. The days that followed settled into a new rhythm. Dawson moved his belongings into the main bedroom, and they began to truly function as a married couple. They worked side by side during the day, managing the ranch together, and fell into bed together at night, their physical connection deepening as their emotional bond grew stronger. Diana found herself constantly surprised by small things. The way Dawson always made sure she had the first cup of coffee in the morning, the way he listened to her opinions about the ranch and took them seriously, the way he made her laugh with his dry wit. He fit into her life so seamlessly that sometimes she had to remind herself they had known each other for less than 2 months. One evening, about 3 weeks after the hearing, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink, Dawson said, "I was thinking we should expand the herd. With both of us managing things, we could handle another 50 head easily. It would increase our profits significantly." "I was thinking the same thing," Diana said, "and maybe build another barn. The current one is getting crowded with all the equipment and the horses." "Great minds think alike," Dawson said with a smile. He reached over and took her hand, lacing their fingers together. "Diana, I need to tell you something." "What?" she asked, slightly concerned by his serious tone. "I'm in love with you," he said simply. "I know it's fast, and I know you might not feel the same way yet, but I couldn't keep it to myself any longer. I love you. Your strength, your determination, your kindness, the way you look first thing in the morning, the way you bite your lip when you're concentrating on the account books, everything about you." Diana felt her heart swell with emotion. She had been afraid to name what she was feeling. afraid it was too soon, afraid she was betraying Thomas's memory. But hearing Dawson's confession made her realize that what she felt was exactly the same. I love you too, she said, and saw joy light up his face. I didn't think I could feel this way again. Not so soon, but you've made me believe in new beginnings. You've made me happy, Dawson. He kissed her then, deep and tender, and Diana knew without a doubt that she had made the right choice in marrying him. This was not the same love she had shared with Thomas. That had been the love of youth, built slowly over time, comfortable and steady. This love with Dawson was more intense, forged in adversity, born of mutual respect and understanding, as much as attraction. It was not better or worse than what she had before, just different, and she was grateful for both. The summer passed into fall, and the ranch prospered under their joint management. They did expand the herd, and Dawson hired another hand to help with the increased work. Diana found herself more content than she had been in a long time, secure in her home and her relationship. In late October, Diana began to suspect that she might be pregnant. Her monthly courses were late, and she felt a familiar queasiness in the mornings. She waited another week to be sure before telling Dawson, nervous about how he would react. They had never discussed children, and she did not know if he wanted to be a father. She chose to tell him one evening after dinner as they sat together in the parlor. Dawson was reading the newspaper from town while Diana pretended to work on mending a shirt, but her hands were shaking too much to make any progress. "Dawson," she said finally, setting aside the mending. "I need to tell you something." He looked up immediately, setting down the paper. "What is it? You look nervous." "I am nervous," Diana admitted. "I think I'm pregnant." For a moment, Dawson simply stared at her. Then a slow smile spread across his face, transforming it with pure joy. "Really? Are you sure?" "Fairly sure. It's still early, but all the signs are there." Dawson crossed the room in 3 long strides and pulled her into his arms, spinning her around. "Diana, that's wonderful. We're going to have a baby." Diana laughed, relieved and delighted by his reaction. "You're happy about it?" "Happy? I'm thrilled." "Diana, I know we've only been married a few months, but I can't think of anything I want more than a family with you." He set her down gently, his hands on her shoulders. "Are you happy about it?" "Yes," Diana said, realizing it was true. "I'm happy and a little scared, but mostly happy." They went to see the doctor in Newton the following week, and he confirmed what Diana had already known. She was about 6 weeks along, and if all went well, they would have a baby in late spring of 1883. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the winter. Diana continued to work on the ranch as much as she could, though Dawson became increasingly protective as she began to show. He insisted she stop riding the more spirited horses and refused to let her help with the heavier work. "I'm pregnant, not made of glass," Diana protested one morning when he tried to stop her from carrying a bucket of water. "I know that," Dawson said, taking the bucket from her anyway. "But humor me. I worry about you." Diana softened, seeing the genuine concern in his eyes. "I'll be careful, I promise, but I need to stay active." The doctor said so. They compromised, with Diana continuing to do lighter work around the ranch while Dawson and the hands handled anything strenuous. As her belly grew through the winter months, Diana found herself constantly amazed by the life growing inside her. She had wanted children with Thomas, but it had never happened. Now, with Dawson, she was going to be a mother. Dawson was endlessly fascinated by her changing body. He loved to place his hands on her belly and feel the baby move, his face lighting up with wonder every time. "That's our child," he would say, his voice full of awe. "Our baby." They talked about names, about how they would manage the ranch with a newborn, about what kind of parents they wanted to be. Diana loved these conversations, loved building this future with Dawson. In early April, when the prairie was just beginning to green up again with spring grass, Diana went into labor. It was a long, difficult process, and there were moments during the worst of it when Diana feared something was wrong. But Dawson stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand, offering water, supporting her through each contraction. Finally, as dawn was breaking on a beautiful spring morning, their son was born. He came into the world squalling and red-faced, healthy and strong. The doctor placed him in Diana's arms, and she looked down at the tiny face, the dark hair so like his father's, and felt her heart overflow with love. "He's perfect," Dawson said hoarsely, tears streaming down his face as he looked at his son. "Diana, he's perfect." "What should we name him?" Diana asked. They had discussed names, but neither had felt strongly about any particular choice. Now, looking at her son, Diana knew what felt right. "What about Daniel?" she suggested. "Daniel Thomas Vaughn." Dawson's eyes widened with understanding. Thomas had been Diana's late husband, and honoring his memory this way felt right to both of them. "Daniel Thomas Vaughn," Dawson repeated, testing the name. "I love it. Thomas was a good man, and our son should carry his name." Diana felt a rush of love for this man who could be so generous and understanding. Not every husband would agree to name his firstborn son after his wife's late husband, but Dawson understood what Thomas had meant to her, understood that honoring the past did not diminish the present. Little Daniel was a healthy, happy baby who quickly became the center of their world. Diana had been nervous about motherhood, but she found it came naturally to her. Dawson was an attentive, loving father who was not afraid to help with the less pleasant aspects of caring for a newborn. Diana often woke in the night to find him already up with the baby, walking the floor and singing softly to soothe Daniel back to sleep. The ranch continued to thrive. With the money they made from selling cattle that year, they were able to build the new barn they had planned and make improvements to the house. Diana hired a woman from town to come help with the housework a few days a week, giving her more time to focus on Daniel and the ranch management. On their first wedding anniversary in June, Dawson surprised Diana with a beautiful new saddle, custom made with her initials tooled into the leather. "For when you're ready to ride again," he said. "I know how much you've missed it." Diana, who had not been on a horse since Daniel was born, felt tears well up at his thoughtfulness. "It's beautiful, Dawson. Thank you." "Thank you," he said seriously, "for taking a chance on a drifter, for trusting me, for building this life with me. This year with you has been the best of my life." "Mine too," Diana said, and meant it. A year ago, she had been desperate and alone, facing the loss of everything she and Thomas had built. Now she had a husband who loved her, a beautiful son, a prosperous ranch, and a future that looked brighter than she could have imagined. They celebrated quietly that evening after Daniel was asleep, with a special dinner and a bottle of wine Dawson had been saving. As they sat together on the porch in the cooling summer evening, Diana reflected on how much had changed in such a short time. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked Dawson. "Marrying me so quickly, tying yourself to all of this?" "Not for a single second," Dawson said firmly. "This is exactly where I'm meant to be. With you, with Daniel, on this land. I spent years drifting because I was looking for something without knowing what it was. Then I found you, and everything made sense." Diana leaned against him, feeling utterly content. "I used to feel guilty," she admitted, "about loving you so soon after Thomas died. I thought it meant I hadn't really loved him. And now? Now I know I love them both, just in different ways. Thomas gave me my first taste of happiness, of partnership. You gave me a second chance at both those things when I thought I'd lost them forever. I'm grateful for both." "Thomas would be glad you're happy," Dawson said. "He loved you. That means he'd want you to have a good life." "I think so too," Diana agreed. The years passed peacefully. Daniel grew into a sturdy, curious toddler who loved following his father around the ranch. In the spring of 1885, Diana gave birth to a daughter they named Daisy Rose. 2 years later, another son arrived, whom they named William. Their family grew, and so did the ranch. Under Diana and Dawson's joint management, the property expanded to over 500 acres. They became one of the most successful ranches in the Newton area, known for their quality cattle and fair business practices. Diana insisted on paying their ranch hands well and treating them with respect, and as a result, they had loyal workers who stayed for years. Martinez, who had been with Diana since the beginning, became foreman. Coleman eventually married a girl from town and built a house on a corner of their property, continuing to work for them while starting his own small herd. The ranch was not just a business but a community, and Diana and Dawson were proud of what they had built. Robert and Charles Hamilton had disappeared from their lives entirely after the failed court case. Diana heard through town gossip that their freight business had failed and they had moved to Colorado. She felt a moment of sadness for them, but mostly she was simply relieved they were gone. On quiet evenings, when the children were asleep and the day's work was done, Diana and Dawson would sit together on the porch they had expanded and renovated over the years. They would talk about the day, plan for the future, or simply enjoy the comfortable silence of two people who knew each other deeply. "You know what I was thinking about today?" Dawson said one such evening, when they had been married for nearly 8 years. "What's that?" Diana asked, her hand in his. "That day I rode up to this ranch looking for work. How nervous I was, how you looked at me like you weren't sure whether to hire me or send me packing." Diana laughed. "I was suspicious of you at first. You seemed too good to be true, showing up right when I needed help most." "Lucky timing," Dawson said with a smile. "Or maybe fate." "I believe it was fate," Diana said. "I think you were meant to come here, meant to save the ranch, meant to become my husband and the father of my children." "Our children," Dawson corrected gently, as he always did. He had never drawn any distinction between Daniel, who carried Thomas's name, and their other two children. They were all his, all loved equally. "Our children," Diana agreed. "Our family, our home, our life. I wouldn't change a single thing about it. Not even the rushed wedding, the legal battle, all the stress of that first year. Not even that," Diana said firmly, "because all of it led us here, to this moment, this life, this happiness." Dawson lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "I love you, Diana Vaughn. More every day." "I love you too," Diana said. "Thank you for being my partner in every sense of the word. Thank you for fighting for this land with me, for building this family with me, for making every day an adventure." As the sun set over the Kansas prairie, painting the sky in brilliant shades of gold and crimson, Diana felt a profound sense of peace. She had loved and lost, had fought and won, had grieved and healed. She had taken the greatest risk of her life in marrying a stranger to save her land, and it had turned out to be the best decision she ever made. The ranch that Thomas had started and that she had fought to keep had become something even greater under her and Dawson's stewardship. It was not just a piece of property, but a legacy they would pass down to their children and grandchildren. It was a testament to hard work, determination, and the unexpected ways life could surprise you with second chances. Inside the house, Diana could hear the children starting to stir, waking from their afternoon naps. In a moment, she would go to them, help them get ready for dinner, listen to their chatter about their day. Dawson would help, as he always did, equal partner in parenting as in everything else. But for just this moment, she sat beside her husband on the porch of the home they had built together, looking out over the land they had fought to keep, and felt profoundly grateful for every twist and turn that had brought them to this place. The attempted theft of her land by her in-laws had seemed like a disaster at the time, the worst thing that could have happened to her in the wake of Thomas's death. But it had brought Dawson into her life, had forced her to be brave and take chances, and had ultimately given her a love and a life richer than anything she had imagined. As Dawson stood and offered her his hand to go inside and attend to their children, Diana took it with a smile. This was her life now. The ranch, the children, the partnership with a man who respected and cherished her. The daily work of building something lasting and meaningful. It was everything she had ever wanted and more than she had dared to hope for. Together, they walked into their home, ready for whatever the evening would bring, secure in their love and their shared purpose. The land that Diana had fought so hard to keep had become more than just property. It was where she had learned she was stronger than she knew, where she had found love for the second time, where she was raising her children and building a future. And every day, as she worked alongside Dawson, as they made decisions together about the ranch and their family, as they faced challenges and celebrated victories, Diana gave thanks for that desperate day when she had agreed to marry a stranger to save her claim. It had been a marriage of convenience that became a true partnership, a legal maneuver that became a genuine love story, a risky gamble that became her greatest blessing. The prairie wind blew across the land as it always had and always would, carrying with it the promise of seasons to come, of challenges and triumphs ahead. But Diana and Dawson would face them together, as they had faced everything since that fateful day in the spring of 1882, when a drifting cowboy had ridden up to her ranch looking for work and had instead found home. Their story was not the one Diana had imagined for herself, but it was the one she had been given, and she would not trade it for anything. From the ashes of loss and the threat of theft had come something beautiful and lasting. She had not just kept her land, she had gained a true partner, a loving family, and a happiness that filled every corner of her life. As the stars began to appear in the darkening Kansas sky, as the children's laughter rang through the house, as Dawson's warm presence beside her reminded her that she was no longer alone, Diana knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The journey had been difficult and unexpected, but it had brought her home in ways she had never anticipated. And that, she thought as she helped Dawson gather the children for dinner, was the greatest gift of all. Not just the land she had fought to keep, but the love she had found in the process, the family she had built, and the knowledge that even in our darkest moments, life can surprise us with possibilities we never imagined. Her in-laws had tried to steal her land and home, and in defending it, she had found everything she had ever truly needed.